really need to know. We returned to it. Like I stated before, we wrote things down so we wouldn't have to remember them. So the founders clearly wrote down in the preamble what the role of the federal government is. The rest of the powers not specifically granted by the Constitution are left up to the state. And far too often we see Washington, D.C. right here in the middle of South Dakota telling us how to run our state, when we know what the solutions are and how to solve our own problems. If we could just get a little of Washington, D.C. out of South Dakota and a whole lot more of South Dakota ideas in Washington, we could solve our own problems. We've been able to do that for over 100 years here in our state. And one of the reasons is because the way that we run our fiscal house here, set in place by our predecessors, is far different than what you see coming out of our nation's capital. South Dakota is fortunate because of a lot of work by our early state residents to have 3 of the least stressed counties in the entire country: Brown County, Berks County, and Lincoln County. And I will tell you, it's because of year after year of running the state in a fiscally conservative way. Wandered off topic here a little bit, sorry about that. The real answer is the role of the federal government is clearly defined in the Constitution, and the very nice of that, I believe, is in the preamble.
The most important role of the federal government is defense of our country, defense of the people, security of this country, and security of the people. As I mentioned in my opening statement, one of the basic platform premises that I'm running on is shrinking the size of the federal government. Today, the federal government has become involved in so many things that I don't believe the founders ever intended it to be. They've walked into areas that ought to be left up to state and local governments. And those are things that we need to unwind, frankly. We need to send men and women to Washington that have the courage and the understanding of the 10th Amendment to do that, and I'm prepared to do that. You know, this also leads into the other question that we will probably get into later, is simply this national budget crisis that we're dealing with. And we wonder, why do we have the huge budget deficits that we do? And a lot of the reason for that is the fact the federal government has chosen to step into areas that it doesn't belong and create programs and agencies and things that it really doesn't need to be doing. It's not part of the national priority. And so I think as we look to how are we going to solve the budget crisis, we need to look at what really are our national priorities and what should the federal government be involved in.
As a moderator, I'm going to exercise a little personal privilege here and remind everyone in the audience, if you have questions, bring them to the table. I'm also going to ask the timekeepers to allow 3 minutes for this next question, because I've tried to break this up for the last 10 minutes, and there's no way to make this any simpler than the question is. So I'm going to give you as much time as I think I can. The question is, do you believe that you can cut back on government programs? If so, which ones, and what strategy would you use? Do that in 3 minutes.
That's a whole lot of apple to take a bite off in 3 minutes. But I think without question we can rein in the federal spending. And the short answer is that there is no sacred cow in the federal budget, and there is no ox that is to be spared from being gored should the necessity arise. You know, we have to look through all levels and all departments of the federal spending to find the savings that we know are there. One thing we know government doesn't do very well is keep track of how it spends our hard-earned dollars. And it keeps even less track of how it spends dollars that we haven't given. And that's why we've seen things like $1.5 trillion deficit for the last 2 years, and it will continue for the foreseeable future, doubling our deficit in 5 years and tripling it in 10. And just one small example. Medicare now has $60 to $80 billion worth of fraud in it. And that's multiple times greater than the whole program was supposed to cost us in 2010 when it was started way back in 1965. And a lot of that fraud doesn't come from doctors and hospitals and nurses trying to take good care of patients. It comes from people that are gaming the system. You might call them criminals that are taking advantage of the taxpayer. And we have to figure out a way to aggressively pursue those things and recapture that money so that we can use it somewhere else, or pay down the deficit or decrease the cost of doing business. And you'll find that, I believe, in every program that the federal government is involved in. The only thing government can do is consume. It can't really create or produce anything. All it can do is take our hard-earned money, the fruits of our labor, bring them in, and redistribute them to some other place. We've got to bring this back.